Somerset mom said, islands attract misfits and malcontents. And when we first came here, it seemed like it. And we fit, yeah, well, it still does maybe. But I thought, oh, this is great. I fit right in here. I'm Marybelle, and I've lived on Sanibel since 1953. And my friend Milbrey Jenkins Rushworth has been here longer than I have.
Well, I've lived here since '49 and I've come here all my life.
In 1845, Florida became a state, and not many people lived around here, I guess, except there were Indians around, and Esperanza's grandfather, who was Spanish from the Canary Islands, and to Cuba, and then to here, and other Spanish fishermen lived on these islands. Not many white people until the homesteading. We got our lighthouse in 1884, and homesteaders started coming in the 1880s. And our light was a revolving beacon and kerosene oil, and it needed a tender in the early days. And Shanahan came from Key West with his family, and they became the first permanent settlers in 1888. He became the lighthouse keeper in 1892, and he served 22 years. And the Matthews came in 1895 from Kentucky.
Way back, Kentucky.
Yeah. And of course they started Matthews Lodge, which is now Island Inn. And the Reverend Barnes came to Sanibel, I guess about 1889 or early 90, and he started Casabel Hotel.
Oh, it was called the Sisters.
The Sisters, early on.
And it was called the Sisters because where the hotel was where the three sisters' homestead land met. Because they all took out home, they all homesteaded, everybody in the family.
I thought it was two sisters and a brother.
I thought it was, well, maybe it was two sisters, whatever. It's where the sisters' land met, though. That's why they called it the Sisters, I think.
And then the
And
gospel.
they were here in it was a hotel in 1890, because in Florida's vanishing era, she talks about staying there in 1890.
We might mention another old timer, Bowen, Oliver Bowen, who was the first white settler at Wolford. He and his wife Mary from Trinidad homesteaded up there. He died soon after, and he didn't last long, though he didn't live long, and his wife stayed to prove up the claim, because when you homestead, you have to stay 5 years and improve the land and pay the registration fee or whatever, small fee, and if you've improved the land, then it's yours. So she stayed for that, and then sold it and moved on, I think, returning to Trinidad.
Well, wasn't he trying to grow a substitute for rubber? And Edison was also interested in that at that time. And I seem to remember reading that he'd sail asleep up the Glusahatchee and meet, excuse me, and Edison would be sitting out on his dock fishing, and they'd have confabs, which always sounded very interesting and romantic to me.
Well, they grew sisal or agave, and I don't know if that's the same thing. Agave plants in the Yucatan, they grow that for hemp, for sisal to make rope and all kinds of things. But I think they were looking for here for substitute for rubber, because Edison was, Firestone was, and Ford, the three friends from Fort Myers.
Well, the Baileys were from Virginia, but they came here from Kentucky, didn't
Yes,
they?
they came in the 1890s too, didn't they? And Mrs. Bailey, Mary Bailey, came with 3 sons. She had more children than that, but they're the 3 that came. Ernest, Harry, and Frank. And Frank is the father of Sam and Francis, who own the grocery store, Bailey Store. And John is an other brother. He has a ranch around Jacksonville, isn't it? Then how about Letitia Nutt? She was another homestead. Came in about 1889. With 3 daughters, Cordy, Nettie, Letty, because she was named after her mother, Letitia, and Nanny. And her mother-in-law, and her brother. Yeah.
And they built Gray Gables.
Yes, they built Gray Gables, and Mrs. Nutt, the mother, was the first school teacher here, I think.
She's also the first postmistress.
Yeah. I have the names of 2 old-timers from Captiva. William Binder. I think his story is interesting because as a youngster, well, I don't know how young, but he was a cabin boy on a German freighter, was wrecked off Boca Grande, and he clung to some of the debris, and I think he ended up in Captiva, and he ate fruit and seafood and survived and put some boards together, made a little boat and got over to Pine Island, and somehow people helped him get back to Germany. And when he was 38 years old, he returned to Captiva, and he homesteaded land there and was the only one in Captiva for 10 years. I think that's remarkable.
And the Charlotte White Kinsey's
The Ibers.
The Ibers were there. They had a hotel.
Yeah, and also didn't they come originally to Buck Key to plant grapefruit?
Yeah, and then they moved on to Captiva.
And the Ibers' daughter married the Kinsey, was Andrew Kinsey. And he was on the steamship line, and his son Ernest Kinsey had the ferry boats.
Yeah.
I have some statistics about May 1st, 1889. There were 21 houses, 40 families, and 100 people. I know when we came in 1953, there weren't very many people. Somewhere
They
between.
used to figure, what, about 200 in the summer,
Yeah.
and a few thousand in the winter.
And that was past the heyday, though. I expect that during the peak of the farming era, because this was an agricultural place, there were a lot more families. And then after the hurricanes and some other factors that decreased the farming, people went, somebody told me that after the First World War, when some of those young men went away to see other places, they just never were content back here. And another factor was when the area around Okeechobee opened up and the land was really rich, that some of the people went there. So farming waned, and there wasn't much to do to make a living around here.
Well, the first I remember, except for flashes, is when I was 7 years old. And it was lovely. Most of the roads were little tracks with grass in the middle. Main Road was that way. And there were houses, winter homes around Island Inn and around Sanibel. And there were homes down on the bay. And of course, the along Prairie and Golden, where some of the farms had been, but there wasn't much development. It was always, I mean, there were hotels, but there weren't very many. There wasn't even a restaurant, except at Allen or Jezebel.
Well, Milbrey, talk about your mother's house.
What, the beach house?
Yeah.
Or my grandfather's cottage?
Well, talk about your grandfather first.
Well, they came in 1902 and stayed, have I already said this? I was talking to somebody this morning about it. Anyway, he had heard about Sanibel from a man who surveyed it in Lansing, Michigan. The man was passing through, telling him about the tomatoes this big. They grew on this beautiful little island in the Gulf of Mexico. My grandfather got pneumonia and they sent him to Hot Springs, Arkansas. And it was cold. And he remembered this little island, so they came. Of course, they went to Punta Gorda, stayed overnight in a hotel, came down the river on the steamboat, and stayed overnight with the Matthews. And my grandmother hated it the first night. The next day, they fell in love with it, and they came back every year except the year that my uncle was born, until they both died. And they bought a cottage next door to Island Inn, which was called Buttonwood Cottage. And then, of course, when they were gone, it was Mother's. We used to come down in the winter. And as I say, we just thought it was pure heaven. But I was looking for some pictures for one of the guests of the inn is writing a history of Island Inn that the guests remember, you know, and trying to get it all together. And I was finding these pictures of all these pictures of everybody fully dressed on the beach, watching somebody else doing something. Now there may be a turtle, or there's a manta ray, or there's something, but they seem to have spent a lot of time standing around fully dressed, looking at somebody else swimming, or whatever was going on. But, and of course they had dances at the Matthews. And Mother used to say that every Sunday afternoon, every other Sunday afternoon, the ladies from Casabel would get all dressed up and come to call. And the next Sunday, the ladies from Island Inn, or the Matthews, as it was at that time, of course, would get all gussied up and they'd go down to call at Casabel. And when you look at the dresses that these people wore in those days, I mean, they really are rather dressed up for an island, but then everybody dressed like that.
That's right. They didn't have sports clothes.
No, definitely not. But, they used to take picnics, and at first they'd take a horse-drawn or a mule-drawn, whichever, cart up to Wolford.
Probably mule.
Yeah.
Didn't have many horses.
No. And have a picnic, and then later they take the car up to, and I've got pictures of, well, I found one of my grandmother and grandfather in the car, and I think Earl Cartwright, Mother used to talk about him, he was an opera singer that used to stay at the inn. I think one of the people was him. And they were obviously out for a picnic. And then the letter in there from Ernest Bailey tells about, well, no, Frank wrote to Ernest, sorry, tells about the tea parties. And I think they used to have tea parties down in the dock at the store in the afternoons. And Mother got involved in that somehow. But they had a lot
That was
of
quite a
fun.
social life.
Oh,
going on
yes,
here.
yeah, it really was.
But the surprising thing is that people like Sally's family from Casabel really didn't know many people on the island, except the people at Island Inn.
Well, and Casabel.
And Casabel,
Yeah.
yeah. Because without cars, they could not travel around, all around the island. Cars.
Well, actually, my grandfather brought the first car that was ever on Sanibel one winter when he was down here. And he used to drive it around. Well, he used to say, "You back into every palm tree on Sanibel learning to drive." That winter we were here in 32, 33. We took a bath in the tub in the bathroom. I mean, in the kitchen, on the kitchen floor once a week. And we had kerosene lamps. Mother cooked from a kerosene stove. We thought it was pure heaven. And we had an outhouse We had to go out back in Euless. And it was, we always thought Sanibel was heaven. And I forget, all these people that came here, and they tell a story about Allie Matthews. Somebody came and they wanted to know where the plumbing was, and the bathtubs and so forth, and she pointed at the Gulf and said, there you are.
When you were talking about the outhouse, it reminded me about the 8-holer, the octagon.
Oh, yeah,
outhouse.
and Mrs. Morey lived in that house.
Yeah, afterwards.
Yeah. And every time, and she was a lovely person, but
Yes,
she was very prim and proper. And she was always getting a bee in her bonnet about something, and one time she decided that Mother's steps were on her land. So she had it all surveyed, and of course she was wrong, but whatever. But anyway, every time I get really upset with her, I'd start thinking that her living room was octagonal, and that had been the octagonal outhouse for the beach house, and I would get so amused at this prim and proper, very stiff old lady living in this house that I'd start laughing, and I couldn't possibly be mad at her anymore. That used to be funny. And of course now that's a Royal Turn condominium at $1 million an apartment.
Yeah.
Now things do change. When we were here in 1932, Webb Shanahan would have been his son, delivered the mail. And if you wanted a bottle of liquor, you had to know from the post office box out in front of the cottage, and he'd come by after dark and leave a bottle. He also picked it up on the beach where they'd been thrown overboard because the Coast Guard was after the people running it through. And Woodring's Point was supposed to have been a place where there was lots of it. That made an awful lot of difference too.
Well, maybe some things we should say is we got electricity on Sanibel in 41. We got what we call city water. That means we didn't have to rely on our wells and cisterns in 1966. And the causeway came in 1963, May 1963. So when we got the trappings of civilization, more people came. It wasn't a big resort place like it is now. It was more...
It was always a resort.
Yes, but what I mean is people didn't come and go. They came and stayed for the winter. Or they came and stayed for a month. Of course, we didn't have the day trippers.
Well,
as many.
they still do that.
Yeah. But there were 4 ferries at the end before the causeway came in 1963. And 2 of the ferries could carry 9 cars each. 1 could carry 8, and 1 could carry 7 cars. So when you add that up, that's all you could get over here in an hour. That was the winter schedule, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And in the summer, they ran 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12. And knocked off for 2 hours for lunch, and 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And so you couldn't get many people either way in the summertime. They didn't want to come anyway.
They didn't change the summer schedule of those last summers when it was so busy over here. I can remember the cars lined up all the way down to
That's why they were
the standard
They
train
didn't.
station to get off the island. No, I just don't remember that.
Yeah. Well, they came over 4th of July or something like that, but if you remember, the mosquitoes were so bad.
Only at times.
Summertime.
Yeah, but not all summer. You'd get spells of them, and you'd have them for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they'd go away for a while.
But our reputation was what kept people away. I mean, I've had relatives that would stop in Fort Myers in the summertime and ask the way to Sanibel, and the gas station attendant would say, "You don't want to go to that place. Mosquitoes are terrible."
Yeah, but they never sent anybody to Sanibel from Fort Myers in those days anyway. They always sent them to Fort Myers Beach. They had no mosquitoes on Fort Myers Beach, you know. They were just over here. No, the mother lived in Fort Myers in 26. She said in the summertime they'd wake up in the morning, and the mosquitoes, when they were bad, which wasn't all the time, were so thick that you couldn't see daylight on the 2nd floor. Now those are mosquitoes,
Yeah.
and I don't ever remember mosquitoes like that over here.
I do. I do.
But you lived on the bay,
Yeah.
and I lived on the Gulf, that's why.
That might make a difference
Mm.
because of the prevailing breezes.
Mm. But you woke up and found your screens covered with mosquitoes?
Covered, yeah, we would.
I don't know, that never happened to us.
Well, Milbrey, when we first came here, we rented, if you remember, the house that belonged to the Sis, which is now Truffle's Restaurant.
Yeah, this was, well, no, it's patterned after.
Yeah, that's what I meant. The replica, the restaurant's supposed to be a
Yeah.
replica. Of course, they had vegetation planted all around the house, and if
But you don't do that.
if you lived year round in those days, you kept everything clear of the house so you wouldn't have mosquitoes around. That was torture. That house was set back from the Gulf maybe 200 feet, maybe a little more. And in order to go swimming, put your suit on and run like mad to the Gulf. I mean, it was worth your life just to get out there. Then you have to swim because some of those mosquitoes followed you. I could see why not a lot of people came in the summer. It's funny, we have different memories of it. I remember mosquitoes.
Oh, I can remember going out to hang out clothes, and we'd wear a big hat, a cheesecloth over tied around our necks, one of Daddy's long sleeve shirts, gloves, jeans, and socks.
Yeah.
And the noise of them would drive you nuts, but that's when they were bad. They weren't always bad, where we were, because we were on the water.
Yeah.
And sometimes they blew away. And there was some green stuff around the house, but not an awful lot. I mean, it was sand and shell, our yards except for the back.
Well, see, we hung up our clothes in the back, and that's why it was so awful. Finetta,
That's what we
Dale
did.
and I
So bad.
put on our little swimsuits, and then put those jeans and long sleeve shirts on us, ran off the clothesline, hung up the clothes, ran back in. By that time we were dripping wet, and we'd throw off our clothes and be ready to go to the next load of clothes. We had a ringer like that. Got those ready to go out, and we have to put the jeans and the long sleeve shirts on again and go out there. We also applied mosquito repellent to face and ankles or anything that was vulnerable. But still, it was fun. It was fun to live here.
Well, we used to find that in the summertime, we always kept a spider and a spider web, because we didn't have too many guests in the summer, at each end of the hall, upstairs. And the mosquitoes that got upstairs, they ate pretty much.
You know,
They never
I had forgotten about those big housekeeping spiders.
and they were the
This
summer
big.
pet. Now, in the winter, you had to get rid of them because you had guests in the house.
They
but
scared the
in the
guests.
summer, yeah, you kept them. And they never went, now, any one-story house, my children have never allowed any spiders. But there, for some reason, they were never a problem and they didn't frighten anybody. But that took care of the mosquitoes on the second floor very nicely, somehow. Most of the time, anyway.
Pirate Playhouse. Oh, it was called that. Now it's called Playhouse Theater, isn't it? Or Schoolhouse Theater, yeah. Well, that is the building that was the schoolhouse. And I'm told in 1903 it was moved by rollers to the present site.
That's what they say. But
Yeah.
somebody told me that, well, the first school burned. It was down on the corner of Bailey Road, about there, across the street from where the phone station is, I guess. I think that one burned, and the second one they built is probably the one they moved.
Well, when we came, they didn't even have indoor plumbing. And they finally built restrooms, but they were outdoors. So you had to go out of school to go to, but they were flush toilets, so that was pretty good. Then by 1963, they built the elementary school.
I taught there in 1950, which must have been quite an experience for the children as well as for me. And then Sally Bailey, Sally Whittaker Bailey, the school teacher that I
This
was
is John's
helping,
wife.
they hired me because she was swamped. Then she split on me.
She
left me with
disappeared.
8th grade. I had 2 education courses in college, for heaven's sake. Anyway, so then they hired Sally, and she liked it so much that she went back to school and got her teaching degree, but whatever. But when I taught there was no plumbing. It was the outhouses, and the water was brought every day by old Mr. Fitzhugh, and one of the boys, when they were being naughty, would go out and urinate in it, so then nobody could drink it. It was charming, totally charming.
Those kids did other charming things there
Yeah.
too. Somebody put firecrackers in the stove. You know, there was a little pot-bellied stove that they used for the only heat. We had quite an array of school teachers. I mean, who would come here and teach? Nobody really wanted to. We finally got a good one because, who was it, darling? Nancy, do you remember that? McCann, yeah. She wanted to be an exchange teacher and go to Europe. That was her dream. But when she finally got around to do something about it, they told her she was too old. And so she was looking at a trade magazine about teachers and jobs. And when she saw a job offered on Sanibel, it sounded like a very exotic place, so she came. She was a wonderful, wonderful old gal. She loved baseball. When the World Series was on, she took the radio to school. Nobody did any work. They have to listen to the games. Every recess they played baseball. But I don't mean to say they didn't learn a lot, because they did.
I think she was an excellent teacher.
Yeah, she was a real good teacher. But I do remember going through the years when we couldn't get a teacher to stay, and Mrs. King used to have to come. Do you remember Frank King's wife?
Yeah, I worked for them.
Oh, over at Casabel Hotel. Well, we had one teacher who had a 40-year-old sister who was retarded, badly retarded, mentally retarded, and she would take her to school every day. And it just got so impossible, because these kids were full of mischief. You heard of some of the things they did. Well, and then when the teacher's attention had to be split, part of the time taking care of her sister, and part of the time trying to take care of these young hellions, she would just end up crying. She couldn't take it. She just left. And we'd have people come and help out for a few days at a time. And sometimes no teacher would show up at all.
That makes me feel good, because I felt guilty all these years because I didn't think I was a very good teacher that winter. I guess I was better than that, whatever. I've always thought those poor children in the first grade probably never did learn to read, because I'm not sure I knew how to teach them. They took me over to Fort Myers and gave me 1.5 hour course, and that was the extent of that.
I thought they got a good education. They learned a lot of things that other kids didn't learn. They had a lot of fun in school too. When the school bus driver saw a big gopher turtle, she'd stop the bus, go out and get the turtle, bring it in, turn it on its back, and take it home for supper. And we didn't think there was anything wrong with that in those days.
I went to that school in 32 for about 2 weeks. Mother decided they were much too rough for her little darling. So she took me out, and I got tutored to down in for the rest of the winter.
Well, Sally Sist tells me her father and mother would never let her go to that school either. They'd come down in the winter and they'd tutor her at home. The kids were individual, very strong individuals. And they had a lot of fun. But I imagine they'd try any teacher's patience. Sanibel School was the first Lee County school to be integrated, and it was integrated because the parents insisted on it, not because that came from the school board or the superintendent of the school or anything. Parents just said it was the law of the land, and it had been for so many years.
No, that wasn't really why. The reason they did it was because of those poor children that were going to Fort Myers on the school bus. to kindergarten, and at 12 noon they were out of school and they had to lie on the floor in the hall and wait for the school bus at 3 o'clock.
Oh.
And we just decided that that was perfectly ridiculous. We weren't going to have it. So they integrated.
But I do remember that Tampa or Miami, maybe both, sent newspaper reporters over here because he thought it was going to be a big brouhaha when they integrated the school. They were very disappointed. There was really no story. It was hard on the kids sometimes when they were going to school in high school because they had to get on the bus and get home. But my parents bought a house in Fort Myers so that anytime there was a dance or anything the girls wanted to go to, they could stay overnight. But in Sam Bailey's day, he had to board in Fort Myers.
Yeah, once they were out of the 8th grade, they had to go to work in Fort Myers if they went any further school. And a lot of the children went up to that school in the middle of the state.
Mount Dora.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful place. I really feel it was a wonderful place to live before the causeway. And it's not so bad now. And the older I get, the more thankful I am to that causeway, though we fought it.
Well, I thought many a time when I took Johnny to the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning for an asthma shot, I was grateful that I had the causeway to go across. It would have been something of a hassle to call a special ferry.
Well, do you remember one time somebody had to get to the hospital in a hurry? I guess there was an accident. And a plane had to come over to the landing strip behind Sanibel, and everybody had to get out with their cars. I don't know how we alerted.
Yeah, vaguely I remember that.
Yeah, and line up on each side of the landing strip so the plane could land. And
I know Edith my sister went to the hospital. Jake took her across in the boat to have one of her children when she was pregnant here because it was night. That's how you got there.
I remember the doors of our shop blew open one night, found it wide open in the morning, but we didn't think anybody had opened it and gone in there. We knew it was just the wind. And other times we'd forget to lock the door. And sometimes people would come in after the hurricane. I think it was Ann Bryant who went in there and took some stuff and left her money and left a note. We were so busy cleaning up our house that we weren't down there.
But I've always been very grateful that while I think my children missed a cultural advantage or two along the way, but they were safe here. I've talked to Cookie Bailey, and she says that she envied us because we lived here, and except for a couple of incidents which turned out all right, there was never harassed. They were always safe. She used to say, if my children go off the block in Tampa, I have to drive them in a car.
Oh, well, we were so lucky. My son, Tim, said, after living in New York City for a while, he was a painter, so he gravitated to the heart of where all the artists went, the Mecca for all kinds of art. He said, Mother, I realize now growing up on Sanibel was like being wrapped in cotton batting. It was so safe and such a gentle life here. You knew everyone and you trusted everyone. And
that's what I miss, is knowing everyone.
Yeah, and you knew anybody would help you. John Clark, the Sanibel Report, Survey of the Island's Natural Systems. He did this for us when we were becoming a city. Islands always seem special, he said, but Sanibel Island is absolutely unique. North America has no shore, no island, no other place equal to it. Nature will not again create such a place.
Sometimes I feel like a tiny island floating in the sea. Palm trees sway, don't get in the way. It's a tropical ease. And everywhere that I keep my silence, no sound returns to me. Just endless waves at the end of our days, the sighing of the seas. But yesterday's gone, I don't know where I come from. Wonder where